Hi, I'm William Shekel from the Chambers Rescue Channel, and today I want to talk to you about what I call the world's first popcorn button, the Chambers Autostat. The Autostat was Chambers' way of regulating oven temperature. If you've watched some of my other videos, you know that in 1919 the American Stove Company came out with the Lorraine thermostat, which after 1929 was on every single Magic Chef stove for a good solid decade. Chambers couldn't use their patent and needed a workaround. And Chambers, being who he was, he didn't want somebody else's solution for his stove. So starting in 1924, they developed a way to regulate the oven temperature that would also automatically turn the oven off once it could cook reliably on retained heat. So what you get when you look at an Autostat is a dial right here, and don't worry, we'll get closer in a second, that not only has different temperatures for you, but also tells you what you're cooking. So you can set it to bread and biscuits, or roasts, or cakes, and so on. And you put your food in, you light it, and then it will automatically shut itself off. And then you can follow the idle hour cookbook's recommendations for how long to cook something on retained heat, the so-called Chambers fireless cooking. So this made it a lot easier to cook with the gas off, which is what Chambers was all about. So let's take a close-up look at what it is, how it works, how to adjust one if you've got one. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing an apron in this video, it's because once I'm done with all the technical stuff, we're gonna put it to the test to see if it actually works. I don't do many cooking videos, I leave those to Beth, but today, if I'm doing a video at work and I need to cook in that video, I'm making something nice so I can have a good lunch. This is the Autostat dial on an early 30s Chambers model 1041. This is an interesting model because it's the last one that offered the thermodome, the first one that offered a thermowell as an option, and you can see immediately why I consider it the world's first popcorn button, because we set it to cakes, or we set it to pastry or meat. It shocked me the first time we saw this. Of course, we know microwaves for a while now have had press the popcorn button and it automatically makes your bag of popcorn. Well, we were doing this 100 years ago on an oven. I just found it really fascinating and amusing. And so since then, whenever somebody sees one of these and says, "What's that?" It's the world's first popcorn button. You see on the dial, it goes down past 300 and get very low, and this brass screw up here stops it. And you can dial it to a temperature, or you can dial it to cakes and biscuit and bread, and all the way up here to roast meats and so on. The earlier versions actually had a brass plate next to the Autostat that gave you much more detail about what was in each one of these temperature zones. I'll actually show you that later because I'm going to show you a few different Autostats today, because if we're going down this rabbit hole, let's go all the way down. So I'll show you what that looked like when I get over to that one. But I want to show you this simplified one at the moment, just so you can see, like, oh, hey, I want to make bread. I'm setting it over here to 500. The way you would use one is you would set the temperature. You'd have your oven door open, ready to light right here in the front. And then you would lift this handle up. There is a mechanism that's hidden behind this post of levers and two springs that push the oven valve open. And then when the dial says, hey, it's time, closes both. Closes the valve to stop the flow of gas, and closes the damper plates that are in the back and on the bottom of every Chambers oven, so that the unit is now contained. It retains the moisture, it retains the heat better, and that's how we do our Chambers cooking with the gas off. So set it, lift it, light it, close the door, and then you just wait. So what you would do is you look in your idle hour cookbook and see, oh, well, they recommend gas on for 30 minutes and then 30 minutes a pound for my roast. on retained heat cooking. So, you figure out the math, and those are minimum times. So if you want to do what they do in that 1926 commercial on my YouTube channel that shows, oh, hey, I can go off to the matinee because I've got this cooking with the gas off. That actually works. That actually will work with this. It'll turn itself off. You don't have to come back and say you're making a 5-pound roast. You don't have to come back at 30 minutes a pound plus the 30 minutes with the heat on. You can come back in the evening and it'll be fine. But with the functionality, you won't see this move. There are 2 gears behind this, and there is a ceramic rod inside the oven. Let me see if, yeah, you can just see that in the camera here. This is tied to the mechanism here and will drop when it is time and push this down. You'll hear it. Yep. You'll hear it if I turn this down a little. Keep going. There. So, like I said, this won't move during actual cooking. It will stay right where you cooked it. But this regulates the temperature. So, hey, if I'm down at 0, of course, it's going to close. So it moves this rod down. It triggers the mechanism that this locks. And so right now the damper plates are open, the valve is open, and when this rod says it's time, everything closes. Gas is off, and so on. Now, their calibration method, one of the big questions with any vintage stove is, well, hey, does this actually work? Well, you see, and I'm going to zoom in again. You see this screw right here. What this does, I'm just going to turn this down to 400 just to make it a little easier. What this does is let you disengage the 2 gears that make this whole thing go. The front gear turns the dial. The main gear sets the whole timing mechanism that controls that ceramic rod that lets the oven know when it's time to turn it off. So what we do is we just turn this a 1/4 turn, and that allows us to pull this out all the way. So if I say, put an oven thermometer in there and, set it to 400, and I look, as soon as the Autostat goes off, I check the temperature and it's really 450. Now that this is disengaged, this turns really freely. I can set it to 450 and just push it back, turn the screw back to be vertical, and now you can even kind of hear it. It turns more firmly. It turns both gears at the same time. It sets your timing properly. Older versions of the Autostat have slightly different ways, same premise, slightly different ways of adjusting the calibration. So I'm going to, since I have them here, I'm going to show you them now. Now this is a Chambers model 1141. It came shortly after the 1041 that we just looked at. Note that it has a thermowell. This was the first thermowell only model. If you look though at the dial, and I can get in a little closer for you, there's no set screw. It's the same thing, but there's no set screw. So how do we release that front gear? Well, let me show you. Okay, so now we're looking inside the 1141. You see these 2 gears. This is the exact same mechanism that is in the 1041 that we just looked at. It's just easier to see because this is underneath the front right burner. And instead of a set screw, you just have this lever. This is what the set screw in the 1041 actually moves. You just lift it up and out of the way, and now we can pull. Hard to do with balance the camera so you can see it all. There we go. There, see that gear move? Now it moves freely, and so we set the pointer to the correct temperature using a good liquid-based oven thermometer. I always recommend liquid-based over those bimetal spring-loaded pieces of garbage. I don't care how good their reviews are on Amazon. liquid-based is your best option for a chambers. Digital is difficult because you'd have to run the line through the door, and the door seals very tightly. So yeah, you don't want to destroy the line for your digital thermometer. Liquid-based is very straightforward. So back to this. When we have it calibrated so that the pointer is pointing at the temperature that is on the oven thermometer when the Autostat shuts the oven off, then we push the gear back, and on this, instead of turning the screw, we just push this down, and now you'll see they move together. So there's one more version, the older version. So these both have been from the 1930s. I know there are people out there with the 1920s version because you've written me emails. So I'm going to show you that right now. It's an even simpler process. Okay, so here we are on an original Autostat from the late 20s. This is on a model 4711. I will insert a picture of this into the video because where it is in my shop, it's kind of hard to pull back far enough. If you've ever asked about visiting and I tell you it's a very tight space, this is kind of what I mean. So we see here, and I'll insert a picture of this as well because frankly I think it's cool. Not only does it have the temperatures down here, but it has a list of different things that correspond to each zone, as they call them. And you can see the roast meats section. Let me see if yeah, you can see that. And again, I'll insert a picture, but you can see at, if you have a 16-pound or an 18-pound roast, it sets to 750. An 8-pound roast is down here closer to 700, and so on in your roast meats section. But then it corresponds, each arrow is each zone. But yeah, so I mean, I just think this is really cool. But to calibrate it, which is what we're over here for, this is actually a little simpler. Now, this is an unrestored stove as well, but obviously I cleaned this up a bit for the video. So what you do is you do a better job of holding this tight than I just did. You take this screw out, and then you lift this straight up, and this lock washer, now if you have an unrestored stove, this will not be as easy. If you ever restored one, it'll be this easy. Now what we do is, without turning the stem, we can just move the dial. It's really just the tightness of the screw that holds that whole thing down to push this pointer into place. And then we set it to where it needs to go. We put the lock washer back on. We put this back on, and of course it only goes on one way. It is cut to, you can tell, it is cut to hold the groove of the stem. And then we put the screw back in and tighten it down tight. So these are the three different types of Autostats. There really isn't another one. So whichever type of Autostat stove you have, you can use one of these three methods to calibrate it. And while there are three different details in the calibration, it's really always the same method. Now, all this is great in theory. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how you're supposed to be able to set it up. But the question is always, does it actually work that way? Can I actually still use it exactly the way they did back in the 30s? Well, the proof is in the pudding, as they say, or in this case, the proof is in my lunch. Because I mentioned if I'm going to cook in my shop, which is not at all set up for food prep, then I'm going to eat well and just have a light dinner later. So I just want to give a shout out to a guy who really helped me explore. Like, I was going to do a pork loin in like a normal way, garlic, herbs de Provence, olive oil, and so on. But I happened to park in front of a local Indian grocery store, Desi Dukan. If you're local to like Montclair, Bloomfield, they're in Bloomfield. But I hope I'm pronouncing it right too. Desi Dukan is the name of it. They're right next to the Dunkin' Donuts. But I walked in and I was like, I want to have something imaginative. And I can't tell you how often I like walk into hardware stores and explain to people what I do when I'm looking for, an odd a solution to an odd problem, and like zero imagination. I was trying to convince the guy I wanted to do pork. I wanted to do something with Indian flavors, just because I like Indian food, and he jumped right on it. It was awesome. I left with so much food, including, like, and I totally cheated with this. Like, this isn't my tandoori sauce. This is a jar of tandoori sauce that the guy gave me and said, no, marinate it overnight and so on. So we like worked out this whole plan for this whole meal. So like you'll see at the end, I have chickpeas going in the thermodome right now. So I'll be slow cooking them while this slow cooks, and I'm going to broil some garlic naan. Anyone who wonders why I look a little wider in each video, this is why. But so we are going to set this up the way it should be. Since it's 1.5 pounds, and that's probably smaller than what most cooks would have used at the time, let me just zoom in on the setting. I'm going to set this down to right at the lower edge of the roast meats. This is just a 1.5 pound pork loin that's been marinated in tandoori sauce overnight. I don't think it needs, all the way up to what we saw on that dial earlier, the 18 pound setting. I'm going to push this pretty low and let it do its thing, and we'll see how well I'm eating for lunch. So the rule of thumb for this is 20 minutes with the gas on and 30 minutes per pound with the gas off. So this is exactly 1.5 pounds. So that means 45 minutes plus the initial 20. So in an hour and 5 minutes, it should be done. And then, of course, we can let it sit longer, which I'm absolutely going to do because I'll be working. So I'm going to get this started. So we set the dial, we turn the lever, hear that clack, and light her up, close the door, and we'll see how it goes. I'm looking forward to lunch. See you in a minute. Okay, I am as curious as I am hungry to see if this worked. It's been smelling delicious for an hour and a half now, cooking on retained heat. Chickpeas are there in the thermodome. Let's open her up and take a look. Well, that certainly looks great. Let's take a look. Okay, let's take a look at whether or not this was successful. Oh man, that is perfect. It's juicy. You can tell, look at that. Oh man. Well, I'm having a good lunch today. The Autostat absolutely works. Because it was only a 1.5 pound piece, it was exactly right to turn this to 550. I can only say, 90 years later, Chambers cooking is still, can't wait to see what it tastes like. And again, my thanks to my new friend at Desi Tukan in Bloomfield for suggesting tandoori sauce and chickpeas and naan. That was, oh man, it smells so good in here, it's hard to work. All right, well, let's put this all together and take a look. I know this isn't a cooking video, but let's just see. Now let's take a look at those chickpeas. I didn't make many because it's just me. Nice and soft, juicy, straight out of the thermodome. Okay, and now let's grab the naan. Okay, now let's check the naan. Oh, look at that. Absolutely perfect. And there you have it. My lunch, the Autostat, the thermodome, all coming together. Pork loin, chickpeas, broiled garlic naan. I want to thank the client for letting me cook in her stove. I really appreciate it. It works. There's nothing like our old technology. Thanks for joining me. I would go back on camera, but I'm going to dig in. I'll see you next time on the Chambers Rescue Channel.